Just recording over here. So you've made it to week 3. You've made it through your first week of coding. You've made it through your first homework assignment, or if you haven't, hopefully you've got your eye on it. Want to remind everyone that we've got 2 more weeks of HTML coming. So if that homework felt a little tough, if you felt like we're going a little quick, that's what a boot camp is, right? It's meant to go a little quick. The good news is we have 2 weeks of HTML left. The bad news is that at the end of 2 weeks, we are not done with HTML, right? So a student said to me, "Wow, I feel like we're going a little quick here," and we are. That's no doubting that. But the good news is that we get more practice as we go, right? These projects don't just stop. Our intro to JavaScript will be the first couple of days will be pure JavaScript, and then all of a sudden HTML is going to start creeping back in here. So if you feel like it's not going fast yet, great. Just wait. If you feel like it is going a little fast, that's okay. That's when we start leaning into the one-on-ones a little bit. That's when we start looking at the homework assignments. But also just keep in mind, don't hold yourself to too high of a standard of, for some of you, this is the first week of you writing code ever, other than, the prereqs. And so give yourself time. It will start to sink in. It starts to seep in. We have some students who, they take it as it comes. And we have other students who are like, I don't think I really get this. And then all of a sudden, a light bulb moment happens in React. And React is kind of when HTML and JavaScript come together and merge. And a lot of students get a click moment there and they go, okay, now I get it. Now I can make this. Now I'm excited for my capstone. So give it time. Week 3 is or the end of week 2 is still pretty early, but tonight we are working on a Netflix project, which is kind of cool. So we're going to be building that together, and then we will head towards our portfolio project next, where we build something that is less rooted in a real website and more rooted in a website that is productive for you guys for getting a career. With all of that said, let's kick off. What concepts clicked last week? What concepts did we struggle on? What do we want to get a little bit more practice on this week? How are we feeling?
I feel pretty great.
Cool. Who
Div,
else?
Div started to click for me after a little while.
What
Going pretty good.
What was clicking?
Like how to use it, like the different ways to use divs and like rows and stuff.
Okay.
Setting up different classes for it, stuff like that. I wasn't getting it at first, but after a while, it got to me.
Awesome. Who else?
To add on to it, definitely class and IDs kind of help definitely when we use div. So if we want to work on one section of a website of content in that div, we're able to isolate that div and by also stylizing it in styles CS that we attach to it. And Bootstrap kind of helps too. So when everything's kind of like not in a decently ordered fashion, the Bootstrap will help kind of keep everything contained and in order so that we don't have to do it line by line per se.
No, that's right. Bootstrap definitely did help out a lot.
Yeah, and there is something called CSS Grid, which is now native. CSS Grid came out after Bootstrap did, many years after Bootstrap did, and is now supported. But we've gone kind of back and forth on whether or not we want to teach that in the curriculum. And there are some concepts in there that are a little bit harder to understand, but it also allows you greater flexibility. So just like we have learned that Bootstrap uses Flexbox under the hood, and that's a really powerful tool, it's also a little bit harder to get started using that, right? And so that's why we still teach Bootstrap. It's not to say that you can't make a website without Bootstrap. Just like a very popular framework called WordPress. WordPress is used to make a ton of sites on the internet and is a really great idea if you're making a website for a client. And that is largely because the client can edit the content without having to modify the code. We don't get a ton into WordPress just because we're focused on full stack development. Full stack web development is usually for creating more apps than it is creating strictly just websites. But we're starting to see Bootstrap's the first framework that we've touched. When we get into our development a little bit more, we're going to learn vanilla JavaScript and then get into React, which is another framework. And then as we progress, we're going to learn about Express, which is a framework for Node. And we're also going to learn Sequelize, which is not technically a framework, but another thing that makes SQL easier to interact with in our JavaScript. So throughout this, we are going to see a lot of tools that are helpful to us. That does not mean that you have to use that tool, just like it doesn't mean that the only way to build an API is with JavaScript, right? There are lots of other languages out there, and that's important to keep that in mind. But when you're applying for jobs, you're also going to want to keep that in mind, right? Because you may see a job for a full stack web developer and it says, oh, we only use Ruby on Rails. And you're like, I don't know that, I'm not going to apply. No, 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 no. That is something, especially for entry level, where you go, okay, that may be a different language, but that's a different syntax, right? Just because we see a different language doesn't mean we don't know those concepts. If you talk to someone in the South or in the Midwest or on the West Coast, they're going to use slightly different verbiage, but they're all still talking the same concepts, right? They're all trying to communicate the same thing. And that's what you kind of want to think about with different languages. Programming languages, at least. Okay, sorry, that was a little bit of a rant. Anything else? Did anyone have any light bulb moments from last week? Did anyone have something that clicked? Did someone get over a hurdle that they've had in the past that they kind of understood a little bit more last week?
All right, so I guess I'll jump in. So I guess I had a little trouble when I was doing the assignment to, I guess, figure out which part of the Flexbox I was really sort of working on. So I was doing a lot of weird things, like I would adjust the margin and all of a sudden I would lose my column spacing and stuff like that, and things would pop down to another line and stuff like that. So figuring out which part of it was which was kind of handy, but also learning how to, in the CSS, just to do some debugging, you start painting things different colors just so you know that if I do this, this other color should start appearing. And that's a really sort of helped me clear it out so that I could, at the very least, if I couldn't get the right part of it, I could see where I went wrong and then at least go back to where I was, because I rewrote my CSS a couple times.
Absolutely. And that's a great thing to practice with. And I will try to call attention to that in this Netflix project of using different colors for not only background, but also border to kind of see, all right, where is this div? Where is this row? Because the computer just does that without you being able to see it. And so by setting the background color, that can be really helpful for understanding where it's taking up. And you'll also see sometimes I will go into when I'm debugging your code, I'll go into inspect because I'm like, your code looks fine, right? I don't see any problems with it. Clearly there is a problem with it, but I can't see it. So going into the inspect tools can also be helpful to kind of hover over a div and see, all right, this is where the browser is putting the div, this is how big it is, this is the border and the margin and the padding all related to that div. And using those developer tools will become even more important as we go, because HTML, CSS is obviously a very visual thing. JavaScript is not. JavaScript is more cut and dry, which you would hope would be better for the errors, but the errors are actually trying to be helpful, right? The errors are trying to tell you not just what is wrong, but where it is wrong. And so over time, you get practice with that debugging. Excuse me. And that's a very normal thing. So I want to encourage you guys, don't start from scratch. Don't just push through it. Go through it, try and figure out how the computer is understanding it, because all of that will be very helpful. Anything else from last week? Good, bad, or ugly?
Well, for me, I I try to like recreate like the news site that we did while like having to look at the code and stuff. I did pretty fine with it. It's just I think my only problem is with the indentation sometimes, because I noticed like some of the headlines and stuff is a little off to like sometimes it goes like a little bit to the right and stuff. But I actually managed to like fix it, and I'm also doing the extra credit, the free code camp extra credit, so that kind of helped me too a little bit.
Yeah, then that's very I'm glad you're mentioning that. If you explore in Canvas, there are those optional assignments. Them are not sorted in with the due date. So if you go up to the top right in Canvas, there is a sort by, and one is date, and the other one is category or group or module. I can't remember what it is. That is a great way to look at the assignments because it will group what you have to do this week compared to all of the additional resources down there. So we don't expect you to be an HTML master in 12 hours of class. Nor do we expect you to do that in 36 hours of class or 3 weeks of HTML. But we're trying to give you additional resources there, whether that's going back and reviewing the videos and having that sink in, or whether that's going to free code camp and practicing with it some additional resources. I also know that, and I owe you guys mentor pairings. That is definitely coming this week. But I know Karen is a graduate of the program, as are almost all of our mentors. And she really had a lot of luck with textbooks, right? She learned well in class, but then did even better when she was able to supplement that with just text and being able to read it. I will get that list of textbooks to you and send that to you in Canvas, in addition to some mentor pairings that are coming this week. Anything else from last week?
Yeah, I'd like to say how I really like those emit shortcut commands, because I have to type class whatever so many times, especially with the news project, and I like that that's a thing that we can do that.
Yeah, Emmet is very, very powerful. And like I said, I don't personally use it a lot, but that isn't meant to discourage you from using it. Emmet is one of those things where whenever you do something a gazillion times, chances are there's a quicker way to do it. So that is definitely worth looking into if you are someone who liked the little shortcuts of exclamation point enter and being able to type in a period, your class name, and hitting tab or enter and having it auto drop in that all of those characters for you. That's something to look into. Just like when we open up our closing div and it puts that, or sorry, our opening div and it puts our closing div in for us. Some people love that, some people hate it. So there's a balance to strike there, but shortcuts can definitely be used to our favor. And I know someone mentioned indentation, right? And making sure your indentation is right. We're going to use a tool called Prettier. We're going to install that tonight once we get our code set up. And we're going to see how the computer can not only help us with indentation, which is definitely helpful, but it's really helpful when all of a sudden it stops indenting, because that stopping indenting can tell us when there's actually a problem with our code. When we missed a div, when we screwed something up, when we copied and pasted something wrong, that's a sign that we've got to go back and fix it. So we will get into that tonight as well. Anything else? Okie doke. So to get into the what's coming down the pipeline, we will be working on a Netflix mock-off called Maxflix. And obviously this looks pretty similar to Netflix.com, which you've probably all been on at one point or another, whether or not you're a subscriber. But there's a lot going on here, right? And you can kind of see how this is a step up from the news website. We start getting into a little bit of icons. We start getting into playing around with different fonts that are available to us. We start seeing some layout that is a little bit more advanced, with not only background images, but making sure the text aligns. But at the same time, we still see some familiar elements, right? With some grid images, grids across, this time using images. And we start looking at this and we're going, all right, we're not going to make this in a day. We're not going to accomplish this all in 3 hours, right? But we can start to see, hey, layout wise, this is all kind of familiar. This is the first project that we aren't going to do the visual layout, but we can start to see how grid elements start to come together. So this is what we are headed to, but with all projects, we got to get started with our basic files setup. So we're going to head over to VS Code. I'm going to go File, Open Folder. I am going to go all the way back up to my code folder. Make sure you are not in your week 2 folder that you've been working in all last week. I'm going to go up to my code. Again, if you are in icon view and that works for you, that's totally fine. I prefer column view. So up at the top left, let me make sure that's still there. Yeah. Up in the top left, there are 4 squares. If you prefer the column view that I work in, feel free to go down to show as columns. I'm going to make a new folder called week 3, W3. And this is the first project that we're going to spread out over several days, right? So you're going to see how duplication works. And the reason why we do that is so by the time you get to the end of the week, you can kind of see our day over day process and what we've accomplished in each day. So anyway, now that I have a week 3 created, I'm going to go ahead and call a new folder D1. And once that is created, I'm going to go ahead and hit open. Now that we've got day 1 created, I'm going to make 2 new files, one called index.html, the other one called style.css. And I am also going to share a live link with you guys that I will put in the Zoom chat. Reminder, do not click on that link. That opens it in the browser and can do some weird things. So before you open up that live share, try to go to File, New Window in VS Code, then use the live share icon over on the left, click on Join, and then paste that link in from Zoom. Also going to go live and then give you guys a minute to get set up. It's very weird. The live share is not working as okay, there we go. If you would like to see my code, which is basically a white screen at this point, you can open up in the live share under shared servers, and that will show you my code, the live view of it. Just like most of you are in, we'll give you one more second. Joining the live share is optional, by the way. So if you prefer, if it's easier for you to follow along with Zoom instead of the live share, that's totally fine. Okay, so lots of new stuff coming down the pipeline here. More practice work with the grid, but we are going to see fonts for the first time in this project, and we're also going to see icons for the first time in this project. Plus, we're going to get more practice work with images, which we did see in the news site. So that is all coming down the pipeline. But for the most part, the main goal here is just more practice, right? There aren't a ton of new concepts here coming in HTML, but we got a lot of practice that we've got to work on. Okay. With our index.html, we still have some additional setup we've got to do. So I'm going to do my exclamation point enter. And again, that's an Emmet shortcut that's going to put in all of the required and recommended pieces of our HTML. I'm going to go ahead and call the title of my website Netflix, because document is something that we don't want to forget about in the tab that shows up. And then we are going to go ahead and get Bootstrap installed. And again, a reminder that Bootstrap is not required to make a website, but it is required if we want to use their grid system, which in this case we do. So before we forget about it, I am going to go ahead and head to my web browser. I'm going to go to getbootstrap.com. I'm going to click on read the docs. I'm going to scroll down to number 2, and where this link tag is, I'm going to go ahead and triple click that. I'm going to hit copy. I'm going to head back over to my VS Code. I'm going to go beneath the title, and I'm going to go ahead and paste that in. And while I'm here, I'm going to make one other link tag to my style.css. Do not forget your rel, which is a style sheet. The order of the href and the rel actually don't matter here. In case you were ever curious, I'm going to get both of those in. I'm going to head to my body tag, and I'm going to put in an h1 that says hello. I'm going to head to my style.css. I'm going to put this in the lower half of my VS Code window so that you can see both of them. Totally personal preference if you like to split the view. I'm going to target my h1 with a color of red. And if all is working in my live server, I should have my hello in red and in Arial. Pausing there for a moment, letting you all catch up.
Hey Max,
Yes.
is there a reason why uh it looks like Bootstrap like I don't know, adjusts like I would say the container, but it doesn't seem like there is a container. Is it messing with like the viewport? Why it's shifting the placement of the text around?
Yeah, it's a great question. If we comment out the link tag, we can see what it would do without Bootstrap installed. And you can see it has some, I don't know if it's margin or padding, it could be either, that kind of pushes everything in. Oftentimes, as a HTML developer, there are a lot of defaults that come built into text elements and additional elements as well. Where we're like, we don't want you to do that. We don't want you to add padding for the sake of adding padding. We want you to just reset everything and make everything 0 by default. And then we'll add in that padding if we choose to want it, right? And so there is something called reset CSS that is used all over the internet. And basically it targets all of these HTML elements and says no margin, no padding, no border, make everything the same size, and we'll build on top of it. We'll set our own sizes. So this is the most commonly used one. Bootstrap, I don't think uses this directly, but uses something pretty similar where it says put everything back to the same, and then we will customize what we want to adjust on top of that. So very astute observation that Bootstrap does use some kind of reset here in that they remove the margin and the padding. And then they go back and they basically add their own amounts on top of it.
I see. Interesting. Thank you.
Yes, great question. Anyone need a minute? Anyone not have their hello in red or in the Arial font? I should confirm that that is actually Arial. Oh, it is not. It is the Apple System UI. And then Helvetica. And then Arial as the fallback. Good to know. Should say not Times New Roman. If it's Times New Roman, we've got a Bootstrap install issue.
Mine is not red.
Okay.
I don't know what's going on.
So couple things to check. make sure you've got your link hrefstyle.css with a rel of style sheet. And
Let
then
me
also
check
make
that.
sure in your style.css you've got your H1.
I didn't link the style sheet.
That will do it. It seems like a dumb step that we do every single time because, you know, we go back in and delete it, but making sure it's set up now saves you a headache down the road when you're like, I don't understand, it's in my CSS, and then it's just not linked. Everyone good? Anyone need a minute? Anyone not have red and in non Times New Roman font? Okay. The website that we are referencing, because I don't want to get into any copyright trouble, I just put in the Zoom chat. I don't have a screenshot of that for you, so if you would like to pull that up and reference that as we are going, that is totally fine. I'm also going to send you a zip file of all of the images so that we have that set up and out of the way. And then we are also going to get Prettier set up for the first time today. So give me 1 second to send you those zips. Okay, so in the Zoom chat, I actually can't screen share this part. Kind of annoying that I can't, but you can't see my chat window. So if you head to Zoom, go ahead and download those images. And then in the top right part, if you hover over that image, that file, it will give you a little down arrow with a line underneath it. Click on that, and you can download it right to your downloads folder. You want to download it to downloads, not right into your code quite yet. Once you do have it downloaded, it should show up in your doc or in Finder as img.zip. Go ahead and open that up in your doc and then click on that zip file. And the Mac will automatically expand it for you and make a new folder called img. Ignore mine says number 2. Once you have the folder, again, we want to grab the folder, not the zip file. We can grab that folder, whether it's from Finder or your doc, and drag it into our VS Code window under Explorer. So once I have it there, I'm going to go ahead and drop it. And it's going to say, do you want to copy img2 or add img as a folder to the workspace? Please, 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 for the love of God, do not hit the big blue button that is so tempting to hit. Hit copy folder instead. We do not want a workspace. Workspaces are a pain in the butt in VS Code, and I never use them, even though they can be very powerful when we're working in a much larger project. So when you drag and drop that folder in, do not hit add folder to workspace. Hit just the regular copy folder. And then I need to do a quick rename because I already had one, but you can leave yours as img2 or img. And inside of that, there are all kinds of files that we'll be working with in a second, but that is all of the supplied images for this project.
Wait, excuse me, where did you want us to drag it to again?
Yep. Drag it from your downloads folder into your day 1 folder in VS Code.
Oh, okay, okay.
And then VS Code will be like, oh, do you want a workspace? No, you don't. You want to copy the folder. Anyone need help?
Yeah, so what am I supposed to be unzipping this?
So unzip it in your downloads folder by just clicking on the .zip folder, and it will create a new a .zip file, and it will create a new folder called IMG. And then after it creates the folder IMG, you can grab it and drop it into your day one folder right in VS Code.
Wait, there we go. All right, thank you.
Yep. And if you did that successfully, you should be able to click the little arrow to the left of IMG and see a bunch of different file names inside of it. If you did not do it correctly, you will have .zip after the file name, and you need to make sure to unzip that file in your downloads folder before dropping it in. And for the third and final time, make sure to copy folder, not workspace, not the workspace option. Okay. With all of that said, we're going to do one final setup step. We only need to do this once, and we don't need to do this for every single file or every single project that we work on. But as we've been working here, you may have added something like a new element, right? And we say some new text. And if I'm in here, this indentation is wrong, right? This P tag should be indented another level. And in fact, even this head tag and body tag should be indented one more level because they're all inside of my HTML tag. And we're like, all right, we're working on $1,000 computer here, and this computer isn't smart enough to figure out indentation. Something seems wrong there. We should be able to get it set up that every time we save this file, it figures out the indentation for us. I don't show this on week 1 or week 2 because there's something to be said about practicing indentation and being able to fix it. Prettier can be a crutch. It is a crutch that I use every single day at work. The reason why it's a crutch can help you heal, right? A crutch can help you do things faster, but you also need to be careful because what happens when that crutch disappears? When we install Prettier, Prettier will fix all of the indentation for us, which is great. The problem is that when we miss a closing div tag, Prettier is going to crap the bed. It's going to go, there's a missing div tag. I don't know how to fix this indentation. You're on your own, and it's going to just stop working. That is now on you to go through and debug and figure out, okay, where did I miss that div tag? Because once you get it in and save, all of a sudden Prettier will go back to working and you'll get everything good to go. So I'm going to show you this as a crutch, right? If you get comfortable with it, if you get good with your closing div tags, then using it is not a problem. But this is a double-edged sword of getting the practice of not only getting your indentation right, but also debugging. So I am offering this up with a warning of be careful when it stops working. It stopping working does not mean, oh, I'll go back and figure out why it's not working down the road. It means, hey, just like I don't code through an alignment issue, I am going to stop. I'm going to figure out where those missing div tags are. If I can't, I'm going to reach out and ask for help, just like we did before we had Prettier installed. With all of that said, let's go ahead and install it. Just like we installed live share and the live code features, we're going to go over to the extensions. Up at the top in the search bar, we are going to do a search for Prettier, Prettier. And the one with 43.9 million downloads, this may be one of the top 10 most downloaded extensions in VS Code. We are going to go ahead and hit the install button. Once it is installed, we can go ahead and close out of the tab it opened for the extension. We're going to go up to code up at the top, down to settings, and over to settings, or you can hit Command, comma, both get you in the same spot. And then we are going to do a search for format, Format, And up at the top here, we have to turn on two different options. The default formatter, we are going to change from none, and we're going to go down to prettier. It's about 8 options down. Let's go ahead and turn that on. And then there's another option down here that says format on save. And you're going to want to go ahead and check that. So 2 things in settings, search for format. Up at the top, we're going to change default formatter to prettier. And then under editor format on save, go ahead and make sure that is checked. Everyone good? Anyone have a question?
Oh. And that's all for just text editor, correct?
Yes. If you search for format, it will come up a little easier. But yes, both of those settings are under editor.
Yes, sir. Thank you, boss.
Okay. If we close out of that and go back to our index.html, I'm going to go ahead and save this file. And all of a sudden, all of the indentation is going to jump. And if you're like, but I don't like that. I like my body tag over to the left. I don't like it indented to level. Tough shit. That is how Prettier works. Prettier is what we call an opinionated code formatter. Because format, believe it or not, has an opinion, right? There are people who feel that indenting with spaces is better than indenting with tabs. There are people who think that the max line width of any code that you write is 120 characters wide, and there are some developers who think that 80 characters is too wide. There are all kinds of things with our code where we go, hey, when we write an HTML tag, should it be all on one line, or should the content wrap down to the next line? Should we have that opening tag all in one place, or should we have 3 separate lines for every div that we create? Well, there's no agreed upon standard, because with all of those opinions, the computer doesn't really care. The computer is going to show it the same way if we use 4 spaces that we hit with the space bar 4 times, or we hit with the tab key and it spaces it out 4 times, or with an actual tab character that the text editor inserts for us. So Prettier is kind of interesting in that when you start using it, it may fight you a little bit. And you may go, well, I don't like it like that. I like it the way I used it before Prettier. If that's the case, Prettier is totally optional. You can go in at any time, turn Prettier off, and be like, this is an extension that Max showed me. I don't like it. I don't want to use it. I'm gonna turn it off just the same way that I turned it on. Uninstall the extension, make sure format on save gets turned off, and VS Code will go back to normal. No problems there. But I would encourage you to use it for a week. Don't just try it for tonight's class. It takes a little bit of time to get used to. When I started using it, I went, this is, I know how I like my code formatted. I'm going to keep on formatting my code. But I got to the point that I started using it so much that I went, oh, this is kind of nice. And when you're working in a team environment, if everyone is using it, it makes it much easier over time because all of your code is now formatted the same way. So those are the 2 things that I will say. Prettier is totally optional. And the second thing is make sure that if you are using it, that you pay attention to when it stops working, because Prettier will not fix your code. It will only fix the indentation of your code and line wrapping. So if it stops working, it means you're missing a closing div somewhere, and you got to go through and fix it to get Prettier working again. What do I mean by it stop working? Well, if I'm in index and I forget my closing body tag here for a second, well, if I unindent my p tag and go ahead and save it, notice before I even get into my browser, what do I have going on down here in red? My prettier is like something broke, right? And now my P tag isn't indented. Well, now I'm like, all right, what broke? So I'm going to go through, I'm going to read through my tags and I go, oh, my body tag's what's missing. So even if I have this at totally the wrong level, as long as that closing body tag is matching, as soon as I hit save, it's going to move stuff around, but notice how the indentation magically snaps into the right place. That's what Prettier is doing for us. So whenever you've got a red Prettier down here, chances are it's not a problem with the content inside your code. It's going to be a problem with the code missing a HTML tag, or when we get into JavaScript, some other syntax there.
Hey, Max.
Yes.
Mine only indented by a space.
Okay. If we go, give me a second to find this. Go to code up at the top, settings, and then over to settings. And then do a search for tab width with a space in between it. Is anyone else's only indenting by a space?
Yeah, mine was doing 2 spaces.
Okay.
Yeah, now that I've looked at it, it was 2 spaces, but
Okay. So and this may be the default. I prefer 4 for my HTML. I weirdly only prefer 2 for my JavaScript, which is something that you can actually configure when we get there. But if you go code, settings, do a search for tab width, and then scroll down to prettier, it should say prettier tab width. I'm guessing yours is set to 2, hopefully.
it was.
Okay. If you like it wider, which I think is the default for VS Code, but not for Prettier, you can change your tab width here to 4, and that will make the indentation look like mine.
It did. Thank you very much.
And again, total preference there, computer doesn't give a crap, right? So if 2 is something that's visually better for you, use 2. You won't get marked down by the computer. You won't get marked down by me if you use that in any homework assignments. But code, settings, tab width as a search, and then prettier tab width. And you can go ahead and adjust that to whatever you would like. Any other questions about Prettier? Anyone not be able to get Prettier with a double check mark in the bottom?
Excuse me, Max. I mixed the part where you guys brought in the images. I had to grab something from downstairs.
Yep. So if you go to the Zoom chat, scroll up to 6:01 p.m., there should be an image.zip file there.
Yes, sir.
Go ahead and download that to your downloads folder.
Okay.
And then once it's in your downloads folder, if you head to the dock or finder and click on the .zip file, it will decompress the zip and make an image folder instead of the .zip file. Once you have the folder, go ahead and drag and drop that into your VS Code. And
hold on. You said open. You said do what with it?
After you download it to your downloads folder, open the .zip file, and that's what will create the image folder.
Okay. Open the zip file. All right. It is open.
Okay. And then take that folder and drag and drop it into your VS Code file explorer.
Yes, sir.
And then it's going to ask you, do you want to add folder to workspace? You do not. You want to copy folder.
Copy. Gotcha.
And then you are all caught up and good to go.
Yes, sir. Oh, wow, that film.
Anyone else need help?
I feel as if my code isn't nesting properly.
nesting or indenting?
Nesting.
Go ahead, share screen. Let's take a look. Share your screen.
I'm trying to share it. I got a bunch of different tabs up here.
Desktop 1 or desktop 2 is usually what you want to do.
Clicking one and it's not allowing me. Oh, here we go. Open the settings again. I don't know why.
There we go. Okay. Let me take a look at your screen. I'm gonna request remote control, which is probably gonna send you back into system preference or system settings.
Right.
Okay. Nope. Go ahead and do that. Okay, now I can take control. So I don't know if Prettier. Oh, Prettier did install. Normally it installs down here at the bottom. Let's close the file and then try and reopen it, maybe? Nope.
It looks like he's got the same indentation I had.
No, tab width is set to format code format on save. Okay. So yeah, the normally Prettier displays itself down here. Oh, and it isn't. Okay. If anyone else doesn't have the word Prettier in the bottom right of their nav bar, you can right click down here. And these are all of the things that show, and then go ahead and click on Prettier, and that will give you a visual indentation. So yeah, your tab width is set to 2, which is why it doesn't match mine. If you change this up to 4 and then go back here and save the file, it will indent it 4 spaces instead of 2.
Okay.
If you like it on 2, that's totally fine. It's just personal preference.
That's cool. You could do that.
Cool. Anyone else need help? Okay, before we dive into actually making this page, we will go do attendance. Shocker, the secret word tonight is Prettier. All right, secret word again is Prettier. And then when we are done, we are going to start work on our mockup. So this is the site that we're going for. And the first thing that we're looking at is, all right, before we put any grid system in place, before we start any content, I need to look at how this page behaves. And so this is a page that the design is very image friendly. It isn't particularly text heavy. It's just got a lot of pictures in it. And if I expand this all the way to the right, oh, that's not what I meant to say. We'll get into that in a second. And by a second, I mean in 2 or 3 days. When we're here, it's filling up the full width of the page, right? It isn't necessarily getting to the point where there are black bars or white bars or whatever our background color is on the side. I want it to reach all the way to the edges of that screen. Because of that, I'm going to do this all in a container fluid. So there's no hard and fast rule of when you want to use a container versus a container fluid, other than the guidance of if you're using a lot of text on your page that's going to wrap into paragraphs, it's going to wrap to multiple lines, chances are you want a container. If you would like that to go to the very edge of the screen, especially if you're using a lot of images, then it makes more sense to use a container fluid. So that's exactly what we're going to use here. I'm going to go back into my HTML, and my CSS got reset here. So let me put this down to the bottom. I'm going to take out my H1 color red, so we don't need that. I'm going to go ahead and take out both items that are in my body. If you only have one, that's obviously fine. And I'm going to start with my div class container fluid. And I'm going to use Emmet shortcuts here as much as I can as a reminder. So I'm not going to type in my opening arrow. I'm not going to type in div. Because I am working with a class, I'm going to type a period, and then I'm going to type container dash fluid, and I'm going to hit enter. And that is automatically going to drop in my div class container fluid for me. Now I'm going to come back over and I'm looking at a lot of content that's running from left to right. And I'm thinking, well, I could get fancy in my CSS and use positioning. I could try and align this on the right. But from my professional experience, everything is easier to align if I put everything in a grid. But before I'm able to put it in a grid, I need to identify what makes a grid work. And of course, the answer to that is all a row. So I'm going to come back to my container fluid. I'm going to make a new row. And just like my container fluid, I'm going to type in period row and hit enter. And that's going to drop in my very first row for me. And then finally, I'm looking at this and I'm like, this is the tiniest little piece of the entire website. So how wide is that going to be? Well, I could go get out a ruler, or if we're working on this and we're unexperienced with this, we definitely could go into preview and draw the boxes just like we did before. And if you want to do that on break, that's totally fine. But I am going to power through this and I'm going to go, I'm just going to guess that is going to be a col1. So I'm going to do period col1. Terry, I'll come to you in a second. I'm going to go ahead and hit enter on that. And now I am 3 div levels deep. So I'm going to come over here. I'm going to look at this. And of course, when I look at it, all I see is a white tab. And I'm like, well, that's no good. Why do I just have a white tab? Because I've got a container, a row, and a column, and nothing in any of them. Okay, that's all right. We got to take one more step here. So inside of my col1, I'm going to put an img, and that src is going to point to logo.png. I save that, I come over here, and I get this lovely broken image icon. Like, the heck, man? So I go back over to my files, and I'm looking in my image folder, and I've got this lovely logo.png. Can anyone guess what the problem is, why my logo isn't showing up?
Oh, because we just gave it a column size of 1 instead of taking up the whole entire column inside that div.
Let's test that. I'm going to say col12, and nothing changes. So good guess, but not the problem.
It's probably because it's not inside like the same I guess root is right?
The same folder. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yep.
same folder.
It's not in the root is another way of saying that. So the problem is all of our images are hanging out in a folder. And by default, HTML uses something called relative file paths, relative to the file that we are in. So it is saying, hey, in index.html, that is in the folder day one. So I'm going to look all the places in day one for logo.png. Well, it's not called style.css and it's not called image, so I don't know where the heck it is. We're like, okay, no, it's in the image folder. So to tell it that it's in the folder, in our source path, we need to say img/logo.png. No spaces between the file paths. Make sure that you've got your extension right. We know it's the right extension because if we open it here, we can see that logo.png. When I go ahead and save that, I get my Maxflix logo. Maybe a little big. We're going to fix that in a second, but I'm going to pause here and make sure everyone's got their logo showing up. Terry, did you still have a question or you figure it out?
Yeah, what was the how I'm trying how to say it. How do you did like was it like period row and then you able to get like the row in there or
Period row, enter or tab, and then it should auto complete the div tag for you.
okay, is that the same thing for column 2?
Yep.
Okay.
Any div with a class on it is going to be a period, the name of the class without a space between it, and enter. Or
Okay.
tab.
All right.
How'd you
Thank
make
you.
that Maxflix?
What's that?
How'd you make that logo?
Very good question. There is actually, if you Google Netflix logo generator, I think maybe it's the first one. Maybe not. Let's test. Does mine have a curve in it? I can't remember. Yeah, mine has a little bit of a curve in it. If you just play around with one of the couple first links here, yeah, this is the one that I use. I'll drop this in the chat if you would like to generate your own logo. You are more than welcome to. But this one, you just type in the name that you would want. It defaults to the similar font. And then it puts this style on it by default. And then you can go ahead and drag and drop this image into your downloads folder, rename it to logo, and throw that into your own files. And then you can use your own little icon. 9 times out of 10, someone else has thought of your idea before you have. So much easier to use the tools that they have created for you than trying to recreate it in Photoshop or a similar tool from scratch.
My Maxflix is humongous.
That's okay. We're gonna
okay.
fix that next.
Okay.
Wait 1 second, Max. I needed help with the image. I'm not understanding why it won't go into my editor over here.
Okay, share screen. Okay, you're trying to drag day one into day one. We don't want to drag day one in, we want to drag the image file in. Okay, now we've got another problem of that is an alias. It isn't actually the folder with the images inside of it. So let me request remote. And inside of this, yeah, we got lots of problems. Okay, let me go back to Finder. Let's reset you here. So we're gonna delete this. Can you open the Zoom chat? And then if you scroll back up to 6:01 p.m. and download that file, it's going to ask where you want to download it, and you're going to want to save it to the downloads folder.
6:01 p.m.
Yep, if you go to the chat, you should be able to scroll up. And if anyone else thinks he's crazy, we actually can't see what he is seeing right now.
All right, let me see. All right. All right, I re-downloaded that.
Okay. And it went to the downloads folder?
Believe so.
Okay, so if we open up Finder and go to your downloads, it did not download there.
Hold up. All right, go ahead. There we go.
Okay. Do you have to hit the save button in Zoom, or is there anything else in Zoom? It's weird because it says 0 bytes, so it means it was trying to download it and didn't. Oh, there we go. Okay. So now that we've got it in downloads, we're going to double click on it. That creates the folder. And then we're going to take that folder and drag it into your VS Code and hit copy folder. And now if we put this image tag in here with img/logo.png and save that, Prettier is mad at you. And this is a really good example for everyone. We see Prettier in red down here. That means Prettier is like, something's broken in your code. Go fix it before I can indent everything properly. In this case, our image tag went red. The problem isn't with our image tag. Oftentimes when we see red in VS Code, the problem isn't with that line in particular. It's with the line right above it. And in this case, we're just missing our closing arrow tag on that div. Now VS Code that you've put that closing arrow tag in is like, oh, I'll close that div out for you. We don't want that because we've got 1, 2, 3 opening div tags and 1, 2, 3 closing div tags. Everything's right there. So we're going to take this closing div out, save. You will notice not only did it indent, but it made Prettier happy. And now if you take a look in your browser, you have your logo showing.
Thank you.
No problem. There is no shame in asking for help here. So if anyone needs help, if anyone does not see the logo showing, now is the time to ask for help. Or if anyone has red in Prettier in the bottom right, or does not see Prettier in the bottom right, now is the time to ask for help.
But what if I am afraid to ask question because I don't want to hold up the class?
This is the time to learn how to debug, right? This is the time to get practice, because if you don't get practice now, I'm just going to invent more projects. We're already a day ahead of schedule. I'm a creative person. I will find more things for us to practice with before we leave HTML. So you really do not want to challenge me there. Mostly joking. Not entirely, though. All right. Anyone need help? Anyone not see that logo? Logo should be pretty big at this point. Okie doke. So I'm over here and I'm like looking at this, and there are two things that I've got a problem with. One, this entire page background is black, and two, my logo is huge. So let's try and solve both of those. I'm going to head back over to my VS Code, and I could target that image, right? I could go into my CSS and I could write something, don't follow me on this yet, where I just set my IMG width to 100%. Oop, not 1,000, 100. And I come back over and that does fix my problem. That does size it out. What am I saying by width 100%? I'm saying that the column is already sized. We already told the column that it should be 1/12 the width of my row. But this is something that we do so frequently. The other problem with this is that we're targeting now all images on the site. And I may not want all images to be 100% width. I may want some of my images to be bigger or smaller. So the better approach to this, instead of doing it in my CSS, which is working for now, would be to come back up to my IMG tag and add in a class of IMG fluid. Now that you can follow me on. So I'm going to add in my class of IMG fluid, and now I see that logo showing up and in the right size. We're going to fix one more problem, and then we're going to play around for just a moment before we move on to additional content.
How does it know to make it that small?
Very good question, because the column is that small. So
Oh,
100% is saying 100% of the parent div that you are in. And we're going to see that col1 in 1 second.
What could ID also work too?
ID won't work unless you made an ID with width 100%. The reason why this image fluid is working, you're like, well, where did that come from? I haven't put anything in my CSS, right? It's the same reason that col1, row, and container fluid are all working. Those are all defined by Bootstrap. And if you're like, but Max, how would I possibly know that? If you go to Bootstrap and type in IMG fluid, the first thing that will come up is the bane of my existence, and I hate Google sometimes. You're on this page and you're like, this looks a little funky. And all the way up at the top, it says there's a newer version of Bootstrap. Why in God's name does Google link me to not the newest version of Bootstrap? I do not know. It drives me nuts. But you'll get on this page and you're like, this is the official Bootstrap documentation. All of this must work, right? Wrong. There are times that Bootstrap will change something like image fluid, and you're looking at the wrong documentation. So if you ever land on the Bootstrap website from a Google link or from some other link, and it says there's a newer version of Bootstrap, or up at the top it says 4.0 or 3.0, pause. You are on the wrong site. You are on an older version of the documentation that may have changed. So if you go back to Google, the second link is actually the link that you want. It says 5.3. How do we know we are using version 5.3 of Bootstrap? Because in our file, if we look at this very long URL, look at what it says after the word Bootstrap. It says 5.3.3. We are on 5.3. The third number is called a patch version. That 5.3.3 is something called semver, semantic versioning. We'll get into that down the road. Anyway, I'm going to go to images 5.3. There is not anything at the top that says you're on a old version of Bootstrap. This looks just like the link that we got it all from. And in this documentation, you can see that it says, hey, image fluid just applies a width of 100% and height auto to everything that we're using. Joe, question.
Yes. If you go back to your live server real quick.
Yep.
Yeah, what you actually have here. Why does it look like yours has margin on yours? Mine's right up against the edge.
Do you have it in a container fluid and in a row? And in a col1?
Yes.
And it's the left margin that you don't have, or the top?
It's the left margin that I don't have.
Share screen.
Looks right. There we go. All right.
You don't have a container, you have a container.
Ah, that makes sense.
There you go.
Cool.
Yes, I will always make fun of typos and try and pronounce it as much as I can.
Valid.
All right.
In that case, I'm going to point out the typo on your Netflix page.
Oh God. On the live one or the one that we've done so far?
The one that you created as that one. Yeah, there's a typo.
Where is it?
It's in the show description.
Book.
Le book. Le
Le
book.
book. Le book.
Labak.
How? I would have just copied and pasted that. I don't understand. Anyway, I will fix that at some point. I got to figure out where this code even is. I've been using this now for 3 years and no one has called me out on it. So I will fix that. All right. Let's get it working in black, the background in black, and then we will figure out how we kind of visualize the rest of this nav bar. So background in black is pretty easy. I don't recommend targeting native HTML elements by default, right? What do I mean by native HTML elements in my CSS? Well, just like we did the IMG width 100% here, I don't recommend that because, oh my God, I can't type. Because that will apply to every image on the entire page, and we normally don't want that. But in the case of something like the background, we want the entire background to be black. We're not going to have situations where we've got multiple sections that we're trying to change the background on. This is one of the few times that we can make an exception and say, you know what, I just want the background to be black on everything. In order to do that, I can target my body. My body is this tag all the way up at the top, right? I'm not even doing it on my container because my container may have some margin on it that may just indent things a little bit, may give it a little bit of breathing room. I don't want that. I want the entire page to be black. Because of that, I'm going to target the body, and then I'm going to say background is black. I save that. I'm feeling pretty good about myself. I come over here, and I've got a black background.
Wait, so you wouldn't do background dash color?
Background, either one will work. That's totally fine. Background will actually support additional properties. I don't know them off the top of my head, but background dash color is targeting a specific property of the background property. So either one will work in this case. I'm trying to think of another good example of that.
Oh, is it like border?
For example.
It's like border. Yeah, border will take the width
Like
of
in
the
comma.
border, the line style of the border, and the color of the border. But if you just specify the width of the border, by default, it will assume that you want the border to be black and solid.
Sure.
Very good question. Okay, so let's play around with this a little bit more. So I'm in my, I'm looking at my mockup and I'm like, I've got some content over here and I've got some icons over here on the right. And I got to figure out how I'm going to space those out so that they look right. And so I'm going to come back in here and I'm going to use some comments. So I'm going to put a comment at the end that says end of logo call. Enter for a new line, command / to insert that comment. Now I've got to go, all right, where do I want this to show up? I'm still working in my first row here across the screen, but I'm outside of my logo column. So I'm going to come down here and I'm going to just put in a column. And I'm going to say categories. And you will see that I'm a big fan of getting layout fixed first before I put in any content. Because in content, it's really easy to miss a closing div and then have your entire layout break. So what I'm focusing on is let's get the layout done first and then go in and modify that. Just like we put an H1 in and turn it red to make sure our CSS is working, we are trying to get our brains to work in the smallest possible testable piece before we add in any additional complexity. So I'm going to add in my div class call here, and I'm going to add in another column. Let's add in a comment that says end of categories call. And I'm getting my div soup here. I'm getting really indented. So I'm going to lean on the VS Code tools. I'm going to click on this div down here, and it's going to highlight that that is related to the container fluid. And I'm like, nope, I'm in the wrong spot. So I'm going to move my cursor up, and that's going to say, hey, this closing div is the closing div for the row. And I'm like, all right, I'm getting closer. I want to be in this row, but not in the categories column. How do I know that? Because I'm trying to get this other column over here on the right to show up. So I'm going to come in here. I'm going to say I want to be outside of my categories column, but inside of my row. I'm going to make another call, and I'm going to just say icons. And I'm going to save, and Prettier did something kind of interesting there on me. It threw icons all up on the same line. And I'm like, I don't want it on the same line. I'm going to put more stuff in there. I want the space. I don't like it like that. Too bad. You're using Prettier. Prettier has decided that that is how it's going to format it. That's the way Prettier goes. And so at the end of this week or in a couple weeks, you're going to go, I hate Prettier. I don't want it. I will do my own indentation, and you will turn it off. That's okay. Or you will get used to Prettier and you'll go, you know what? That's a short enough line. I do kind of like it all together. And if I put more stuff in there, it's going to expand it out over several lines. That's actually what's happening under the hood. You will form an opinion on it, and that is okay. If you don't like Prettier, that is totally fine. So I'm going to go ahead and save that. I'm going to go over to my live server, and I can't see almost anything. And if I look really, really closely, I can see categories and icons, but they're in a almost black color. They're in a very, very dark gray. And so now I'm thinking about this, and I'm like, all right, well, my final version has everything showing up here, and the color is white on those. And I'm like, okay, I could very easily make a class and put a class called white text on them, and that would be white. That would be fun. But I'm looking at this entire site, and I'm like, there is more white text on this page than there is black text. So instead of trying to apply white text to every single item on the page, what if I just go to my CSS and in the body, like I said, I want my entire background to be black. What if I say by default, I would like the color of all text to be white? So I'm going to go ahead and save that, and I come over here, and now I've got my categories and my icons in white. Pausing there in case there are any questions, giving you a minute to catch up. Should have a black background. You should have white text. You should have your logo showing, and you should have categories and icons all in one row. They aren't quite positioned right yet, but they are all in one row. If you do not have that, now is your time to ask questions. I promise you, I do not think you are stupid if you raise your hand. People learn better. We've proven this over science if you ask questions as you are learning. So do not be afraid to ask questions as we go.
I got a question, Max.
Yeah.
For I guess syntax purposes, why don't you specify text color? Like I understand why, but why don't you specify text color? Does the HTML default to color just knowing the text?
This is one of the dumbest things in HTML. In HTML, we use font dash something for every property, right? Or text dash something, sorry. So we'll say text dash decoration, or we'll say font dash family, or we'll say font dash weight, right? We use text or font for everything. But because early on, the only color that they thought we would be adjusting was the text or font color, they just thought color is fine to use. And now down the line, 40 years later, we're still using CSS. And the founder, the guy who started writing CSS said that is one of my biggest regrets, is that I didn't make it text dash color or font dash color. I just called it color. And because that decision was made almost 40 years ago, or a little over 40 years ago at this point, we are now stuck to it. So whenever we just say color, we assume that it is font or text color. because they made that decision and now we are stuck to it.
Good to know. Thank you.
Good
All right.
question.
A problem I am having is that my calls, my icon and my my icons went under everything. It went under the max flex.
Okay, go ahead and share your screen.
Yeah, sir.
Okay, so we are a couple things that we got to look at. First thing that we look at, if you give me a remote control, might be on another monitor. Thank you. Our prettier's got a check mark. And if it's got a single check mark or a double check mark, it doesn't matter. So our prettier is actually pretty happy with us. So we're like, all right, it can't be a closing tag problem. So we look at this and we go, all right, where is this div col1? It is inside the row. How do we know it's inside the row? Because it's indented one level deep. That div,
I see what's wrong.
Lines up. We got this div that's lining up, but you already beat me to it. This div is closing out the row. That means we just put this column outside of the row. We want it inside the row. So if we save that, that should fix your problem.
Yeah, sir, it's now fixed.
No problem. Anyone else need help? All right, we got 5 minutes left. Let's do a little bit of debugging work. So this is totally optional. I'm about to undo everything that I am going to show you guys. So if you want to just follow along, that is totally fine. If you would like the practice of following, of debugging, that is also okay. So I've got my categories and I'm looking at my final version and my categories are looking roughly like they're in the right spot, but I know I've got my icons over in the right. And I think that it's going to be really helpful if we can kind of visualize where these columns are going to be. So in order to do that, and again, totally optional to follow me here, I would like to play around with these columns. I'd like to be able to visualize where these are. So the novice approach to this is to say, I'm going to target my column 1, and I'm going to put a background color on that of pink. And I save that, and now I see my pink background. And I can also come in here and target my col, and my col is here. Slight problem, it's also down here. But as I'm playing around with this, as I'm trying to figure out how the browser is laying all of this out, that's okay for now. So I'm going to come down here and add a background color on this of orange and save. And now I see that bar across and I'm like, all right, well, that's kind of helpful, but I've got that problem of this column and this column are actually separate and I can't really tell those apart or figure out how it's spacing them visually. Because when we do layout, our brain thinks about layout visually. And so the better approach to this is to actually use a border instead. So I'm going to throw a border on this and a border on this, a border color, not just a border, because the border needs additional properties. And when I save that, nothing happens because I'm still not doing a border right. So let me do it right. Border 1px solid pink and 1px solid orange. And now I'm able to visualize my grid. Now there are a couple interesting things going on here. One is I've got this spacing on the left of my content that I could dive into, and that spacing is actually coming from Bootstrap. Bootstrap realizes that you probably don't want your content right up at the starting point of the border, and so it's going to put some padding in there by default for us. And so we can actually see that if we go into inspect and hover over that column, we can see all the way down at the bottom, it's adding in some padding. Padding will always be that green color. Margin will be the orange-ish color. So at least in Google Chrome, other browsers might be a little different. So we can see it's adding that padding in for us. We don't need to be worried about that. But in terms of debugging, adding in a background color is very visually apparent. Adding in a border can be more apparent when we're working with classes of the same type. And so now that we've got this in here, after break, we'll actually leave this in here until we get our positioning right. Once we get our positioning right, we can go ahead and take this out. But this can be a very helpful tool in going, all right, how big is my column? What space is it taking up? Sure, I can use the inspect tools in the browser to kind of see that. But while I'm doing my layout, sometimes a background color or a border can be very helpful in making sure my divs are in the right spot. Anyone? Oh, yeah. Austin.
I checked and that all looks good. My borders are not showing up.
Well, it took me about 4 tries to get mine to show up. So go ahead and share your screen and we'll see if we can do it in less for you. Take out the dash color.
Oh, it's okay.
There may be a shorthand for that. I just don't know it off the top of my head. So when you do border, you want to specify all 3 properties.
Got it. And we're good.
I think by default, if you do border color, it assumes that your border width is zero pixels or 0 width, and that's why it doesn't show up.
Okay.
So if you did border color and border width as 2 separate properties, it would show up, or just use the border property and show all 3. Any other questions? Okay, go on break. When we come back, we will get our nav bar looking in the right spot, and then we will spend the rest of the class just getting our header hero image to show up and be formatted correctly. Go on break. See you at 7:25. Zoom did not break. That was totally me. My bad. Must have broken another way, and then it's totally Zoom and not my fault. All right, let's go ahead and dive in. Anyone have any questions that popped up over the break? Okie doke. So we are starting to play around with our columns here. We've got our categories and icons showing up. Let's go ahead and knock out the styling of these links up at the top. And then we will dive into icons for the first time in using those. So it looks like we've got 4 things to show up here. We've got a nice little hover effect that we'll use some CSS on. But this is the first time that we're doing a project where we're not laying out the whole thing first. We are instead laying out component by component, right? Compared to the new site where we did all of the layout and then we went back in and did the content. So both methods are completely acceptable. It's just a matter of which method you like more and which one you're more comfortable with closing divs and all of that kind of stuff. Okay, so let's get our links showing up. The first thing that I think of is these are links going across. And because they are they're all inline, we're not going to use a p tag, which is going to be a block element, or a div, the same block element that takes up the full width. Instead, we're going to use span tags on that. So I'm going to come into my col categories, and I'm going to go ahead and make my 4 span tags. So I'm going to say span home, span TV shows, span movies, and span new and popular. And obviously, if we were building this as a real site, we would make those links actually clickable and scrollable to the right section. But until we learn JavaScript, we can't really get into that. So we are going to leave it like this. Going to let you type that in, and then we're going to switch over to our CSS. Because we're kind of going component by component, instead of just doing all of our layout, I want to do some work to make those links look proper. This is what it should look like when you're done. Doesn't necessarily look particularly good at this point, right? We want to make that look a little bit more like links. So 4 span tags in there. It's acting a little funky, so give me a second. I'm going to reboot that. Okay, so let's go ahead and make these appear the way that I want to. So I don't want to target all span tags on the website, but I do want to target all of the span tags inside of this column. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add an ID on that, and let's call that links bar. And then inside of that, I'm going to go to my CSS. I'm going to target the links bar, and I'm going to target all of the span tags inside of that links bar. And now that I'm able to target those, let's add a little bit of breathing room. So let's say we'll add some margin on the left of it of 5px and some margin on the right of it of 5px. So I'll save that. I'll come over here. And now, just like that, we've got some spacing between the links that's making it look better. And I may look at that and be like, I don't know if that looks right. It kind of looks a little weird. That might be because we've got those orange borders visually throwing you off. So just like we can comment out in HTML, we can also comment out in our CSS. So I'm going to come down here to this col and hit Command/. And you'll see that it adds in the /* on either side. Commenting out can be helpful not only for us to add in comments of, hey, this is what this code is doing. It can also be helpful to comment out code, because now that we've wrapped this in the CSS comment, which is that /*, you will see the computer ignores that section of the code. So when I comment it out, I'm able to kind of see, and I can comment out this col1, I'm able to look at that nav bar and go, you know what, that nav bar is looking pretty good. What's the one thing that's still bothering me about it? It looks like this top row is too close to the top of the screen. And you know what? I wouldn't mind having a little space all the way around it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my div class row and add an ID of nav. And then I'm going to come down to my CSS. The order doesn't matter in this situation. And I'm going to add some padding of 5 pixels to it. So I save that. Now my nav bar, I think is looking pretty good, right? We've got it spaced in. We still have to tackle our icons, but our links icons are separated out. We've got our spans in place, and we've got our links and our margin right there. So I'm going to go ahead and comment back in my border just so that we can see when we get to our icons how that's working. So you're going to take a second there and let you guys catch up. We added in the nav padding. We added in the links bar span. And then in our HTML, in addition to the 4 span tags, we also added in our ID of links bar and our ID of nav. And oftentimes we don't add classes or IDs until we need them. So in this situation, we needed to target both of those, so we just dropped them in. Give you guys a minute to catch up. If anything's broken, just raise your hand and you can share your screen.
I was just wondering, but I think I got my answer. So I was looking I essentially searched if there was a vertical line center for Bootstrap that can be used as a class, and I did find it. So that's also an option, correct?
Yes, that is
Okay.
totally fine to use.
Before I even asked, I just found the solution, but I had already unmuted myself, so.
What's it supposed to look like again?
Like that.
Ah, crap. I think I did something wrong. Hang on, let me try to debug before asking for help.
No problem.
You know what the key shortcut is for selecting an entire line?
I just triple click on it. I don't know what the keyboard shortcut is.
No, okay.
I mean, shift down is what, I don't know if that will select the line underneath it though. Shift command right arrow.
You said shift command right?
Shift command right arrow.
That's not working for some reason. Oh, that selects everything like cursor has to be in front of the line. I had
Yeah,
it
and then
was working with command shift L, I think, but then I installed an extension and then it messed everything up.
I'm not
Here's
the
what
biggest keyboard shortcut guy beyond beyond copy paste and the basics.
I'll find it.
Anyone need a minute? Anyone not having their site look right?
Yeah, me. I can't get the pattern in between the categories
Okay,
to be
sure thing.
accurate. All right, hold on, let me make this bigger. Is that hard to read?
No, the problem that I'm seeing is we look for red squigglies just like we use spell check. So in your CSS, it's confused because you commented out the col1, and now it's like, what's the border supposed to apply to there? So you have two options. You can either comment out line 10 and 11 or comment back in line 9. And command / will uncomment, just like deleting out those symbols. So now if you save, you should see that the rest of the CSS file applies.
Oh, it worked. Thank you.
No problem. Anyone else need help?
Yeah, for instance, I'm still having some gaps showing up in between my borders.
Okay, share your screen.
Oh, I see what was happening.
Okay. So we don't apply the margin left and right to the links bar. We apply it to the spans inside of the links bar. So on line 18, instead
And
of
the word
just
span?
What's that? Yep.
Oh, yep, so I'm missing the word span. Thank you. Yep. No, something obvious. Thank you.
No problem. And don't forget to save if you don't have autosave on. There you go.
Yeah, I couldn't figure it out.
All right, share screen. Okay. Believe it or not, I don't think this is actually a problem. If I request remote, and resize your screen, I think the problem is going to go away, and that's the next thing that we're going to fix. Yeah. So you're actually all right. You don't have anything wrong in your code. Anyone else need help? All right. So Terry found a problem that we got to fix. If I'm over here and I shrink my screen down enough, it starts wrapping down to the next line. I'm like, I don't want it to do that. But I've got another problem over here of my icons are huge. And if we look at my final version, we see these icons showing up and they're in the top right. They're kind of out of the way and they're plenty small. So they're not really going to cause any issues. So I need to figure out, hey, how do I get one, the icons to show up, but then two, make this section smaller? Well, I don't really want to size this column to a specific width. I want it to take up all of the space. But I do want to size this column down so it's big enough just for those icons. And so in order to accomplish that, I'm going to come in here into my icons column and make it a col 3. And when I take a look at that, now that is sized down. Now, when I size this too small, I still get that wrapping issue. Put that in the back of your head. We're going to solve that tomorrow or the next day. But for now, what we should see is our icons showing up smaller. Now, this is a good point to note. I lost my border because I applied the border to any col, but not the col-3. So I could duplicate this, but in CSS, we can put a comma here and say col3 and have it apply both to any col that doesn't have a size and to any col3. And that's just with a comma. You may notice that your prettier ran on your CSS. Prettier supports a lot of syntaxes. CSS is certainly one of them. So I've got my words icon showing up, but I notice that they are at the end of my column. So to do that in CSS, I can go to this col3, and you may have noticed in your CSS, in your homework, you weren't able to apply multiple IDs. You are allowed to apply multiple classes, but you cannot name that, you cannot repeat that attribute. What do I mean by that? An attribute is anything that is something equals in our HTML tag. If I take this col3 and do something, don't follow me on this, like text end and save it, you will see it doesn't work. We aren't allowed to do multiple attributes with the same name. However, we are allowed to use multiple classes. In order to use multiple classes, all we need to do is put a space between the class names. And now that I've got that in there, I'm able to get my word icons showing up at the end. That you can follow me on. So resume following me. I just threw a text end at the end of my icons and made my icons a col3 instead of a regular col.
Does that also apply with IDs too? When you have like the same name of like ID, let's say like logo box, you can't have like two of the same IDs with the same.
You cannot have multiple IDs because IDs need to be unique. So you're allowed one ID and only one ID, and you're not supposed to use that ID elsewhere on the page. However, you are allowed to have multiple classes, and you are allowed to rename those classes.
Okay.
And reuse, not just rename.
Something went horribly wrong, Max.
Go ahead and share your screen. Oh, wow, that is horribly wrong. That is actually some of your live share code sneaking through. If you give me remote access, sometimes it's as simple. Oh, you gotta open system settings and
I see it over here. It came up on my other screen.
We'll do it. Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, sometimes it's as simple as refreshing the page and that will make it go away. In this case,
Okay.
that's what it was.
Cool.
But a good thing to note, if you see a bunch of code show up that you're like, I didn't write that, where did that come from? Sometimes refreshing your page is a simple fix.
Okay, thank you.
And that would never happen like once you get your site out on the internet, by the way. That's only the live server that's making it do that. We don't use live server when we publish our code.
Oh, I was just about to ask that question.
All right, anyone else need help? Okay, so we get into these icons next. And so if I'm looking at these icons, I'm like, well, I guess I could do a Google search for like magnifying glass and Bell, but wouldn't it be nice if there was kind of a library that we could use that would have them all built in? Well, Bootstrap, I believe, has icons that we can use, but I really like using Google Font. Google Fonts, we will grab a styling for this font, but for the first time, we're going to use Google Fonts Material Icons library. So in order to get that working, I'm going to open a new tab, and I'm going to do a search for Google Fonts icons. And the first thing that comes up should be Google Fonts, and it says Material Symbols and Icons. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that one. And I'm going to expand this out a little bit. And down here at the bottom, we've got all of these lovely icons. Well, I'm going to start with the search. So I can go up to the top and I can type in search. Ironically, type the word search into the search, or the first icon up here is the search icon. That's the one that I want. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that. And then if I scroll down here, it says inserting the icon. I'm like, great, that's what I want. I want this span tag. So I'm going to go ahead and copy that code. I'm going to head back to my code. I'm going to go delete the word icons and paste that span tag in. And when I paste that in and look at my code, it says the word search. I'm like, okay, I'm no UI genius, but that's not an icon. That's a word search. What's going on there? Well, when we look at our code, it literally just says the word search. So how am I supposed to get an icon working out of that? Kind of interestingly, it's the same way that we get container fluid row and calls to work. This material symbols outline is a class that RCSS knows nothing about yet. But RCSS didn't know about the call or the rows or the containers until we put our Bootstrap link in. And then all of a sudden, the CSS that Bootstrap has written for us now knows how to make that work. So we need to do the same thing. If we head back to our Google Fonts, what we want to grab is this static icon font. And the good news is we only need to do this once. So this link doesn't change based off of if you use one icon or 40 of the icons. So head back to Google Fonts. Again, it's the static icon font. We don't want the variable icon font. That's a little more complicated. We don't need to get into it. We're coming down to the static icon font. And we're going to go ahead and hit copy code on that. Then, again, final time, static icon font is what we want, not the stuff at the top. We're going to go back to our VS Code. We're going to go up to our head section, and you can paste this before or after your Bootstrap link. You do not want to paste it after your style.css. I will go through these steps one more time as a repeat. So I'm coming in after my link tag. I'm going to paste that in and hit save. And now we've got our little search icon showing up. If you got that working, great. If not, I'm going to go through those steps one more time. So starting from scratch, I am going to go to Google and I'm going to do a search for material icon Google. The first link that shows up is fonts.google.com. I'm going to click on that. Then I'm going to scroll down and get my search icon down here. When I click on my search icon, ignore this top section. I'm going to scroll down and get my inserting the icon. That's a little span tag. Copy that, head to VS Code, and I'm putting that span tag down here in my col3 text end. When I do that, instead of getting this icon in the top right, I'm going to get a verb that says search. Well, I got to tell my CSS how to make this material symbols outlined work. In order to do that, I'm going to come over to this static icon font where I got the span tag, go ahead and copy that. Then I'm going to head back to my VS Code, scroll up to the top, and paste that in between my bootstrap and my style sheet. We always want our style sheet, the custom one that we made, to come last, because whatever comes last is going to make it cascade. It's going to allow us to override whoever else's CSS we're using and put our own CSS in. If this is working, you should see a magnifying glass show in the top right. If it is not working, panic and raise your hand.
All right.
I need help, please.
Harley, and then I'll come to you next, Azad.
I think I copied the wrong thing, but it's not letting me scroll down to what you said the second time.
Okay, share your screen. Google Fonts can throw a fit sometimes.
I got it now.
Okay, cool. Good work.
Is it showing you my screen?
It is not.
Okay, what the heck?
There we go. Now it's coming through. Okay, so put your mouse on the right-hand side of that sidebar and then scroll down from there.
Oh, that's why. Okay.
Yeah, so where your mouse is matters on that. So you're going to want the static icon font and then that span tag right underneath it. Oh, and before you get there, I'm actually going to fix something for you first. So if you allow on that, you might have to go into system settings and... Nope, I'm in. Okay. So what you did is you pasted, I think, in the wrong spot, and you got too many things going on here. So let's clean that up. The span tag is where we want the icon to show up. And so that's going to be inside our col3. And then our link tag, which we only need once, no matter how many icons we're using, is going to go between our bootstrap and our style.css. So when I save that and take a look at your page, you've got a search icon and you're good to go.
Thank you.
No problem. Anyone else need help? Okie doke. So let's get a little bit more practice with that. We're supposed to have a search icon, a bell, and a little profile icon. So I'm going to head back to my Google Fonts. You can close this little sidebar if you want. And up at the top for search icons, I'll do a search for bell. And I get my little notifications here. When I click on that, I'm going to get my sidebar, and I can ignore everything else here because we've already installed our static icon font. So the only thing that I need here is this inserting the icon. I'm going to go ahead and copy that, head back to my code, and paste that in. Make sure you're in the right spot after my span for the search. So we don't need a space. If you want to put it on a new line, you can. But we are going to go ahead and paste in that span. And then the last thing I'm going to do is grab my profile icon. So I'll do a search for profile. Any one of these works. Take your pick. Feel free to get creative. I'll grab this account circle one. I'm going to scroll down to the bottom. Go ahead and copy that. Come back over here. Come after my final span tag, save that in, and now I get my little profile icon showing up in the top right. Now, just like our links up here, I might want to put a little bit of breathing room on those. So I'm going to add an ID to that column called icons. And then in here, I'm going to target my nav, and I'm going to target the icons just with a space in between them. And maybe I'll throw some margin on the right of them of 5 pixels. And margin on the left, also of 5 pixels. I also need to make sure that I don't, no, nav, icons, spam. There we go. And that spaces them out a little bit to give them some breathing room.
If I didn't target the nav and just targeted the icons and span, I jumped a little ahead. That's still
Yeah.
okay?
That's actually probably a little bit better because the ID is specific enough that you don't need to target because IDs are supposed to be unique. So if you just do icons and span, that's fine. What you wouldn't want to do is just target any span, because down the road we may use a span somewhere else. But yeah,
Okay.
targeting the ID specifically is fine. And this is what our final version looks like. So I'm pretty happy with that. Well, we might come back and clean that up. We might get a hover effect going. We might get the vertical alignment looking a little bit better. But for now, I'm like, this is a good starting point, right? We can make it fancy as we go back, as we do a final, what we call a cleanup pass. But for now, this is all that I need. So because of that, I'm going to come back to my CSS and I'm going to delete out my 2 borders, because I'm like, I'm done with them. My layout's looking pretty good, or I can just comment them out. So I'm highlighting all of them, and the beauty of the comment command is that it will handle a multi-line comment for us, no matter what language we're in. So I'm going to highlight line 6 to 13 on mine. Go ahead and hit Command/ on that. That will put in a multi-line comment. In other words, the comment starts here and ends all the way down here. And now I have my nav bar done.
Uh-oh. Oh no.
You need help, Harley?
I didn't know I was unmuted. Is there a way to undo that?
Command Z.
Okay. Thank you.
Comments can get a little wonky. If you've got a comment in a comment, VS Code can kind of panic. So sometimes you need to uncomment the specific lines and then comment everything out all at once. And if that doesn't fix it, let me know and you can share your screen.
This is probably a dumb question, but does comment like when you go to get your page, like your website, like validated kind of, does comments become white spaces and it just get cleared out, or are they kept inside the code?
Kind of a complicated question, or well, not a complicated question, a complicated answer. The answer is yes to both. So oftentimes, there will be comments that stay in your code, and you can actually look at other developers' code and see that they have left comments in it. There is also a process called minification, where it strips out all of the white space to make your file sizes a tiny bit smaller. And often when you minify, it will remove the comments. So depending on how you deploy your website, the comments may or may not be visible to the public. But unless you are specifically going through a process that removes them, by default, they will be viewable to the public when you deploy.
Gotcha.
Or
Okay.
publish is another word to think about it. Very good question. The answer is it depends.
Yes, sir.
All right. Everyone feeling good? We want to get a background image in? Terry, you have a question? No, you're good? Okay. All right. So we're making good progress here. Let's continue to power on. So this is obviously going to be the most complicated section of our website. And the first thing that is most visually apparent to me is that image, right? We want to get that image working because that image is going to impact the styling of all of the content on top of it. So that's where we're going to start. And you may be tempted to just throw an image tag in there, right? But we don't want to do an image tag quite yet because this image is really in the background. So if you do an image tag, you kind of have to get hacky with your CSS and position all of the text basically negatively up so that the text goes on top of the image. And that gets really weird for some layout. Obviously, we use images for backgrounds all the time, so CSS has a mechanism built in for us that will allow us to use a background image. So what we're going to do is we're going to head back to our HTML, and I got to figure out where I'm at. And you know what? I've got some div soup. I've gotten lazy with my comments, and now I've got all of these closing tags and no idea what they go to. So we're going to clean that up first. I'm going to click on this div, and it says, hey, this closing div is the end of my call 3. But a call 3 isn't specific enough for my comments. It's really the end of my icons in my nav bar. So I'm going to come in here and say end of icons in nav. I'm going to click on this closing div, and that's showing me it's the closing of my row. What row? My nav row. So I'm going to say end of nav row. And then I'm going to click on my final closing div, and that's going to show me that's the end of my container fluid. So I'm going to come down here and say end of container fluid. Now, when I'm working on this section over here, it doesn't really scream columns to me, but when I look at it closely, all of this stuff, all of this text is in one column. I've got this space here, and then I've got other stuff over here on the right. Now, we haven't done anything for vertical alignment yet, but horizontally, we can use navs. So I've got to go, where do I want my new row to be? I don't want it to be in the row with my nav. I want it to be outside of that. So that div is highlighted, but I do want it to be inside my container. So I'm going to put my cursor after the closing div for the nav row, but inside the div for my container, and I'm going to make a new row. And inside of that, I'm going to say pretty picture goes here. So I save that, and as long as pretty picture goes here, is in the right spot, you are good to go. Okay, now I got to get my picture to actually show up. So you can call this whatever you want. Sometimes this is called a headline row. Sometimes this would be called feature content. Oftentimes when we've got a big section of the head of the website that is towards the top of the website, we call that the hero image or the hero section. Don't know why it's called that, but components are often named the same thing so that web designers are on the same page. So I'm going to call this my hero. So I'm going to say ID hero. Why an ID instead of a class? Because I'm only going to have one hero section on the page. If I was going to have multiple, then I would use a class. I'm going to come down to my CSS. I'm going to add my hero section in, and then I want to specify a background. And we've done background colors before. This time we're going to do a background image. And background images are kind of unique because they need to be a URL. So in order to tell it it's a URL, I'm going to say URL. I'm going to put in double quotes. And just like our image that we used for the logo up here, it's inside the image folder. So I need to say image/cover.jpg. I save that, and I get this teeny little tiny piece of green. I'm going to take a break after this step and catch you guys up. So yeah, that teeny tiny little sliver of green, and I'm like, well, that's part of my image, but where's the rest of it? Well, background images by default will only take the height of all of the content inside of it. So don't follow me on this step, but I could come in here and add in a bunch of line breaks. And that makes my image just a little bit bigger. And I'm like, no, I don't want it a little bit bigger. I just want it to show the whole image. Well, what we're able to do in our CSS is use a property called min height. We don't want to set the height of it specifically, because if we make it too small here, the content could actually spill outside of it, right? Our text could be long enough, the description could be long enough that now the image isn't growing to fit that size. So we use that min height instead of just height directly to say, hey, the minimum height of this should be 550 pixels, but if it needs to get bigger, it can. If we just used regular height, it wouldn't grow if the content inside of it were bigger than the height that we set. And the final thing that I notice is this is cropped a little bit. I want to see the whole image across. And so the last thing I'm going to do before I take a break is set the background size to cover. I save that. I get my whole image. I get my pretty picture goes here. And we are going to take a break and let you catch up. Okay, what did we do? Let's review that. We threw in our comments at the end of every div so we could easily keep track of them. We added in a div class row, and we put an ID of hero on that so we could target it. We put some text in there, but the problem that we found is when we put our background image in here, it was just a tiny little sliver of what we wanted. So instead of using height directly, which would have a problem of text spilling outside of that div and looking weird on smaller screens, instead we used min height. So you've heard me say a couple times, don't use height specifically. It causes your images to look a little weird. Min height is okay to use because that still allows the browser to expand out the div if you need it. I set it to 550 pixels. Feel free to play around with that, get it to feel the size that you want. And then the last thing that we needed to do was set the background size to cover, which basically means shrink the image down in order to get it to size right. The beauty of using a background image instead of the IMG tag is that we're able to place our text easily on top of it, and we're able to size this out and still have it do the right thing with the image so that we are able to play around with it.
I'm not getting it. My image isn't popping.
Okay, so check this line in particular, the background image URL quote img slash cover.jpg closing quote closing parenthesis. Does that look right?
Yes, sir,
Okay.
it does.
Go ahead and share your screen then. And while you're doing that, I'm going to launch a poll. As always on the poll, don't vote if you're still working on it. Well, I don't see anything wrong with that. Let me request remote.
Yes, sir.
And image, got that right. Row, hero, background image, and height cover. Let me see your browser.
Yes, sir. Share.
If you just drag that window over, it'll make it easier for me to switch between them.
Okay, there we go.
And I'm gonna just I really don't see Page logo. Your logo is showing. You added your ID of hero. Oh, here we go. You gotta slash the beginning of your div. There you go.
Oh, yes, sir.
That was a good one. Took me a minute to solve that one.
I was
Thank-
gonna say something, but you actually beat me to it, Max. And that also brings up another question. So I noticed I was playing around with the code a bit, and I changed background size cover to contain, but it gave me like the image, but also gave like a partial little image. So what would you use contain for exactly?
Contain can be good when you so there are a couple background properties, not just background size and background image, but there's also background repeat. So sometimes you're using an image that's like a pattern, not necessarily like a photo that's been taken, and you want the pattern to repeat. And so you'll do a background size contain and then a background repeat, and it will just make it so that when you hit the edge of the pattern, it basically puts that image in again. And that can be really helpful for like, if you're thinking about like the metal gridiron hash pattern, you can use contain and repeat in order to make it so that grid pattern doesn't get stretched all the way out. It just gets stretched to the height of the container, and then we'll repeat it going across.
If y'all
So
had MySpace, y'all would notice. MySpace days, that was a hack. I'm old though.
so for example, if you were to have like a half circle, if you use contain, will it like cover like the other circle? Kind of like that.
No, it would repeat the half circle going across.
Oh yeah.
But if you had one circle in your image and then wanted circles going all the way across, that would be a good way to do it. Backgrounds are one of those things. There's a Giphy that I send my boss on a regular basis, who is not a coder, but used to be. This is the bane of my existence. This is how CSS usually goes. You put in a property and you're like, no, not quite. Let me try this thing. It's like whenever you use blinds and you think, oh, how hard can these blinds be? There's a thing on the left and a thing on the right. And then it never works the way you want it to. That is CSS. So background is probably the best existence of this Giphy, where you're like, oh, a background image, how hard can that be? And you put it in and it's too big. And you go, oh, let me just use background size. And you put that in and then you get a black bar on the right side. And you're like, no, that's not how I wanted it to size. I wanted it to repeat. So you put a repeat in and then all of a sudden it's repeating, but it's not repeating based off of the center. It's repeating off the top left. And so you got to go in and tweak another background property in your CSS. So CSS is one of those things you just keep fiddling with the blinds until you get the blinds to work. Okay. We've got 15 minutes of class left. It looks like all of you guys are pretty caught up in the poll. Thank you for voting. That gives me a better idea of whether or not we need to take a break before we continue. So let's get our layout done next, and then we will save Google Fonts for tomorrow's class. So I'm going back to my design, and I've got this Netflix logo to show up, and I've got the word series. So the first thing that I notice is that is down a little bit, but in order to get any of that to show up, I need some content in there. But because the word series is going in with the Netflix N there, I need to put that all in one div together. So I am going to come over to my pretty picture goes here. I'm going to preemptively make a new div. I'm going to throw in the word series, and then I've got to work on getting that Netflix logo to show up. Fortunately, I've already supplied that image to you as netflix-n.png. So inside of that div, I'm going to throw an img src, img / Netflix -n.png. Watch your quotes here. Watch that you've got the dash in place. Watch that you've got a capital N, because it will not find that file if you've got a lowercase one. And go ahead and save that. And what it should look like is a giant N and the word series next to it. Guys are joking about MySpace. MySpace was actually crashed a couple of times because people would put code in that was accidentally running on their server. So believe it or not, MySpace is one of the first times of cybersecurity being handed off to consumers and them finding vulnerabilities. At least in mass. Okay. Once we get our N showing up, I'm like, it's huge and it's not in the right spot. And we've got the word series kind of just hanging out there that isn't styled right. So let's work on that. I know I need to target some things inside of here. So I'm going to come down to this div and throw an ID on it of series row. And then I'm going to come down to my CSS, create my series row. And let's get it in spot first. So I'm going to add some margin to the top of it of 150 pixels. That moves it down into roughly the right spot. And then I'm also going to target the image inside the series row. And this is one of the few times that I'm actually going to set a height. I don't need, whenever I set a height, I won't set a width, because I want the browser to figure that out. I want the browser to use the aspect ratio of the original image to size it properly. So I'm using height here on an image because I don't want it set by a column. I don't want it to be responsive. I don't want it to be 100%. I don't want it to be a percentage of the column that it's in. This is one of the few times I'm setting a height, but because I'm setting a height, I'm not setting a width. I'm going to go ahead and let that the browser figure that out for me. So I'm like, already with 2 lines of CSS, we're already on the right track. All right, what else am I missing? This text is gray. And we've got and it's in uppercase. So let's practice with that. In my series row, I'll make my color dark gray. And I'm going to transform my text so it is in uppercase. I'm going to go ahead and save that. And we're on the right track. Got a little bit more work to do there. Let's make it maybe font weight as bold. And I'm like, all right, that's looking good. What's the last thing I need to do? I need a little bit of space between those. So of course I could come in and put a space between every letter, but CSS has a property called letter spacing, and we'll set that to 5 pixels. And now we get our word series showing up. Maybe we'll put 1 space in between the word series and the Netflix logo, and that has got me in a pretty good spot. Is it aligned perfectly right? Could we play around with margin? Could we use some flexbox? Sure, but we don't want to get too hung up on one element. And so while you guys are catching up here, think about showing this to a family member or even your boss, right? Be like, I spent 4 hours and look, the word series looks great. And they're going to look at you and be like, that's what you did all day? So we want to, make progress. We want to get everything in. And then as we're going through it, we can start tweaking it as we go.
My series is floating at the top of my
Are you serious?
yes.
Go ahead, share screen. Sorry, couldn't resist.
That was a good one. I didn't think about that.
Okay, let's see. I have a margin top in on my series row. If you
Oh.
scroll up on not the series image in your CSS, just scroll up a little bit. Do you have? No, you don't. Okay, so take a look. You're doing a lot of work on text, but you're targeting your IMG. So if you take a look at my code, I've got it actually split into two pieces. One is on the row and one is on the image.
I don't have the live share up. Can you show me?
Yep. So I've got the series row, which I'm doing most of the work on, and then the
Yeah.
image itself just has a height of 25.
Oh, I didn't separate it. Okay. What made that's too big?
Hey Max,
Yes.
do you prefer to use the font weight instead of if you're trying to bold something, or do you use strong more?
Strong, I believe, let me confirm this before I comment on it. Oh no, I thought strong was deprecated. It doesn't look like it is. Deprecated or depreciated, technically different words mean the same thing in tech. It is it's fine to use if you're using it kind of in line with spans, like you would a span. I tend to use spans with font weight more because if you do a span on it, you're able to apply additional styling, like an underline or any real text property to it. So I prefer to do it as a span. But strong tags are fine if your only goal is to bold one word and you already have your HTML going.
Gotcha. Okay.
All right, we got 5 minutes left. It's a Monday. I can't let you off too early. Let's go ahead and get as much of this done as we can. So the next section of this, we've got the word of the show showing up. This may or may not be based off of my actual viewing history, so don't judge me too hard. All right, so we're gonna get that show title in here. So as always, div placement, always most important part is figuring out where to place it. We want to be inside the div class row of our hero image, but we do not want to be in the div ID series row. So we are all working inside of this over here. I'm going to come down and inside my div, after my div ID series row, I am going to make a new element. I'm going to go ahead and give that a div ID of show name. And then go ahead and type in that show name. Once I have that in there, I obviously need to do some styling on it because right now it will just show really tiny and also in a really weird place. Why is that there? Okay, we'll fix that in a second. Let's get it styled right. So I'm going to target the show name. Oops. And I am going to say the font size needs to be much bigger. So let's make it 56 pixels. Let's also transform it into uppercase. And I'm going to save that. And I'm like, okay, that looks better, but it's still kind of hard to read, right? Now, for something like the word series, that's minor enough where I'm like, that doesn't need to jump off the page. But for the show name, that's definitely something that I want to make easier to read. And this is a common problem whenever we use a background image, because we design something with a specific image in mind. We deploy it out to the internet and some user uploads another show image and it looks terrible and it's very hard to read. So whenever we're putting text on a background image, we want to think about the contrast ratio. Is it easy enough for me to read this text based off of whatever image is in the background? So when Netflix comes out with a new show, it's going to be easy enough to read no matter what. In order to work with backgrounds, what we're going to do is use something called text shadow. And this is a really good hack that I learned from a designer. And we're going to say 2 pixels by 2 pixels and make that shadow black. And you can see, even though it doesn't look visually that different, that text is suddenly easier to read. That is just from that little text shadow. It's not a border, quite a border around all of the text. Instead, it's a border that's offset 2 pixels down and 2 pixels over. And that black contrast makes it much easier for that text to jump out. Now, the last thing we're going to fix is like, what's going on with this placement? Everything that we have done so far has made it so the text just flows down the page whenever we use a div. Well, we kind of broke a rule here accidentally. We used a div class row and Bootstrap's like, yeah, baby, columns, here we come. And then we didn't put all of this in a column. And I'm looking at this and I'm like, you know what? I haven't quite figured out what the spacing is going to be yet. But in general,
Well, sit down, eat.
we should never use a row without using a column first. So what we're going to do, even though we haven't figured out the spacing yet, we're going to put all of this content into a col and save, and that will position our Bridgerton title into the right spot. So we put our series row and our div ID show name into a column. And that is just a reminder, we should never use a class row without putting it into a column first. Totally intentional and not a mistake on my part. And with that said, it is 8:30. So if you've got your show title looking like this, you can head on out and I will see you tomorrow. If you don't, I will stick around for the next couple minutes.
I do have a question.
Shoot.
So, right when you put that last div column, div class column, and I think I might have hit the arrow key and it gave me an extra div closing tag. How
Okay.
did you get it to match up? Because I mean, it shows up good on my end, but I just deleted it because I already had a div tag and it populated to where it needed to go, but it's still like it's not linking, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, so it's just text. It doesn't like, so if you click on this and it highlights the right one, that's fine. If it doesn't, you can manually put in a closing div tag and that will get it to like link back up.
Let's see. How down.
And if it's not doing that, share your screen and I can work with you on it.
Okay, yeah, I wanna share because Prettier is giving me an error. Even though the website looks great, it looks like yours, but Prettier is like, yeah, something's wrong. And I know it's stat tag because I just deleted it.
The very last closing div tags you can get away with sometimes of not having them in, and Chrome will be like, oh, whatever, I'll figure it out for you. But if Prettier is wrong, or if Prettier shown you an error, chances are you're missing one. So we've got
Yeah, I'm missing this one. I know that this column.
opening div. Yep. So all we need to do is throw in an extra closing div. And now when we save, Prettier is happy.
Okay. Yeah, I was just trying to figure out like why isn't, but it was fine. Like if I look at the website, it looks just like yours. I just was like, okay, but Prettier isn't happy. So
Yep.
okay.
All good.
Thank you.
Anwar.
Yeah, I'm having a few. Oh, sorry. I'm having a few issues when it comes to having the images loading on.
Okay.
Despite following you along, it's still showing up as a question mark with the image folder.
It
I'm not
could
sure how I
be
would.
that the files weren't loaded in. Go ahead and share your screen and let's take a look at that.
Sure thing.
Let me request remote. And I'm going to take a peek at your files. You may have to open system preferences and
Oh, here it is.
there you go. System settings, they changed the name of it. Last OS update, and I'm still not used to it.
Awesome.
Okay.
It should work now.
Yep, I'm in. Okay, so if we take a look at our files, everything is right except for the fact that this got called image2. So if
Oh, that must be the
I
reason.
rename that as image and then switch back to your Safari, you are good to go.
Okay, all right. Thanks so much.
No problem. Easy fix. We like those.
Max, how do you get the word to go up again?
Put the in between the series row and the div class row, put everything in a div class column. So this is what it should look like. I left this div class call out by accident. And so by putting it in and then making sure that closing div tag is in the right spot is what made it work. And I don't want to get you guys into saying on here. So if you are stuck, feel free to, and you got to run, feel free to ask questions at the beginning of class tomorrow and we'll make sure we get you caught up. And if you ever miss a class, all of our code from yesterday is on GitHub. So you're always welcome to use that as a starting point. Make sure that that's up on GitHub now.
Real quick,
yeah.
My the Netflix symbol and my series don't have any space between them. And I was wondering why.
Share your screen.
Thanks.
Series row, series image, margin top. Let me see what it's doing in the browser.
Right here.
Oh, I just put a space in my HTML inside that span tag.
Oh, all
right. So yep, right there. If you throw a space in there, does Prettier let you keep it? Yeah, it looks like it does.
All right. Thank you.
I guess a little hacky, you could target the image and add some margin to the
I was
right
about to do that, but I was like, there's nothing there. So I was like, that's something I'm missing. So okay.
Either one works. I guess mine's a little bit hackier, but you know, whatever gets it done.
Yeah, listen, the job is done. I'm good.
Can you pronounce your name for me? Is it Ibri? Iberi. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Go for it.
The background image is not showing up.
Okay.
I don't know what I did wrong. How do you share screen?
Head to Zoom. It's the share screen at the bottom in green, bottom center. And then you're going to pick desktop 1 or desktop 2 based off of wherever your code is. And okay, that's good. I'm also going to request remote control. That's going to send you into system settings, maybe on the other monitor. And perfect. Thank you. I'm gonna go ahead and close that. Okay. Image cover. And you got your that in. And I do not see the problem yet. Here we go. This div had a closing tag in it. Or closing slash. So
That's
taking
why
that out fixed it.
it wasn't, okay. Thank you.
No problem. All right, last call for questions. Going once. Going twice. Have an awesome evening. See you guys tomorrow.